بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه بجهدهم كما هدأ الدين فرضي الله عنهم أجمعين. In this encounter, we sit with a reflection on obstacles in the path of Dawah, and in specific, one obstacle is to transgress the limits that have been set by Allah wa ta'ala. And this follows another obstacle in the path of Dawah that's set out, and that is apathy. That is apathy. To not really be committed to acting on changing our condition. And there's some words to be said about that. But today, we're focusing on the issue of transgression. The author, he says that the second flaw that may creep into the souls of some Muslims is transgressing the limits, or transgression, which must be fought against, and from which all Muslims must seek immunity. In other words, we have to discipline ourselves to be people of principle. And he says that the meaning of transgression is thus: it refers to exceeding the limits with regards to spending money, with regards to food, drink, clothing, housing, or whatever appeals to the instincts of the human being and satisfies lust for worldly pleasures. There are causes to transgression. There are different causes and motivations behind why we transgress, and some of them we will mention. I won't mention all of the detailed evidences that he ushers, because I don't want to make this a long session. One is that he talks about our upbringing as having an impact as to our complicity or conformity to the deen. If we have an upbringing in which the deen is manifest and the principles are manifest that are of balance, frugality, and so on and so forth, then we see that we will practice those. And one of the examples that's given is when we talk about the reasons for marriage, that we should marry a person for their deen. Although it's allowable according to the hadith that a person can marry, or a woman is married for 4 reasons: her property, lineage, beauty, and her deen. And the advice is given: you should better marry the woman of deen, otherwise you will lose. Another reason that causes us to transgress is the issue of becoming wealthy after poverty. We begin to not know how to deal with that new situation. And so we tend to be people of what? Of spending, of consumption, because we were deprived. And so we are not refined in that regard of learning how to deal with money. That's an idea that he brings forward. In the hadith that he brought forward before that was just mentioned, it really is trying to indicate that there are reasons that we do things in the dunya. But the best rationale for our actions should be to practice the deen, and everything else from there follows. But if we focus ourselves on certain qualities and that becomes the purpose of our action, we find ourselves in a situation where we become consumed by the reality of the world. That's kind of the concept that he wants us to think about. He wants us to regard. Why are we doing things? And that we should do things for Allah, and we should have a sense of our purpose in life and the hereafter, so that we gain a sense of balance and discipline, and we don't find ourselves going against principle. Another reason for transgressing is that we accompany people that are used to transgressing. So their character becomes our character, right? Another means of transgressing is that we disregard the means to Allah. And sometimes, and basically what he's saying is that we are not clear on how to attain to the help of Allah wa ta'ala. And so he quotes an ayah of the Quran, "An hasibtum an tadkhulu al-jannata ولما يأتيكم مثل والذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب ألا إن نصر الله قريب." I apologize, my allergies are bothering me here a little bit. But here he quotes the ayah of the Quran. Did you consider that you'll enter Jannah? أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتيكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله. Did you consider you will enter into Jannah without suffering the testing and the tribulation similar to those who came before you, those who were tested in plenty and in deprivation, and they were shaken to a point of asking, when will the help of Allah come? When will the help of Allah come? He translated, did you think that you will enter the garden of bliss without such trials as came to those who passed before you? They encountered suffering and adversity and were so shaken in spirit that even the messenger and those of faith who were with him cried, when will the help of Allah come? Oh, verily, the help of Allah is always near. And so, in this case, he's saying that the way to Allah's mercy in heaven is not one which is facile at times, but is fraught with hardship, with thorns, tears, sweat, and blood. Embarking on such a road is not done through luxury, relaxation, or indulgence in the pleasure of life, but through adopting a manly attitude, embracing hardships as prerequisites required for such a journey. To set out on such a journey ill-equipped is liable to drive oneself into the abyss of self-depression. And so then that we have to study the way of having a relationship with Allah wa ta'ala as we journey through life, and our commitment to the deen, to the dawah, is not something that comes easy, because it's a path that is adorned with hardship and suffering, although there's ease in it, but is adorned with hardship as well. Another reason for transgressing is that our own family members, our own family, our wife and our children may have an influence over us, especially if we lack firm character. And we find ourselves to be people that are indulging beyond the limits in consumerism and in food and so on and so forth. Thus, we may understand the wisdom behind Islam's emphasis on the importance of choosing a righteous wife to build your family upon, so that the environment that you have is one which supports you. And then there's the reality of being unconscious of the world itself, right, and the nature of the world. And he quotes the ayah, تِلْكَ أَيَّامُ أُدَوِّلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ, that, and this is in Surah Ali Imran, Surah Ali Imran. And such days of varying fortune and well-being we give to men, and we give to them these days in turns, meaning that everyone will not consistently be in the same condition. You have whole communities like that they suffer riches and poverty and so on and so forth at different times and stages in their history. And so he outlines this, so it gives us an understanding of the trials and tribulations of life, that everyone suffers trials and tribulations in life. Everyone goes through deprivation and poverty. In other words, the human condition is such It's built into the reality of the world, and it's not anything to fret over, but it's something which has to be dealt with on the spiritual level. And also, one has to be in a position of striving. And we have other ways to deal with this situation, such as sadaqah and community building and people supporting one another. Ta'awun al-birri wa taqwa. And cooperating was good overall in establishing the deen. And these are conditions which create well-being, economic well-being, spiritual well-being, emotional well-being. Another obstacle is self-indulgence, meaning that we have habits in which we indulge in our own desires, right? And so he brings the ayah of the Quran to reflect upon what should we do, what we should be doing. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم ما بأنفسهم إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. And then another ayat which is very important, قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. Verily Allah wa ta'ala will not change the condition of a people until they work on changing their condition themselves, or what is within themselves. And the other ayah is that those who strive in our cause, and then those who are successful are those that purify the self. And those that fail in that regard corrupt the self. And then he quotes the ayah, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلُنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And those who strive and make effort, put effort forward, that we shall guide them to our paths. For verily Allah is with those who do right. So here is emphasizing the issue of the purification of the self, of striving to bring about good within the self, discipline the self, having qualities in which allow us to really create the conditions of Iman. Because after all, what he's talking about is transgression. When there's transgression, we lose the ability, when there's transgression of the limits of the deen, we lose the ability to have a strong Iman. And this is what becomes an obstacle in the da'wah. A lot of times we forget that we have to self-develop, that we have to develop spiritually, that we have to develop intellectually, and that our emotions and our intellect and our soul all should be geared towards the obedience of Allah Ta'ala. Another reason for transgressing the limits is that we're not contemplating on the horrors of the Day of Judgment and what comes to those who transgress the limits. And so we become neglectful in our attitude, absent-minded, careless. And so one of the things that's being encouraged here is to reflect upon the Day of Judgment. And he quotes a hadith, if you knew what I knew, you would laugh little and cry much. And in addition, and you would not enjoy your women in beds much. In other words, that applies to both men and women. In the issue with regarding to sexuality or regarding to overindulgence in the dunya, there's a balance, of course. The Prophet ﷺ modeled that balance. But here the issue becomes that we have to put the dunya in its place and understand that there's a Day of Judgment that's coming. And forgetting about the situation or the plight of human beings in general. There are returners to Allah wa ta'ala, and being ignorant of the consequences of transgression. And so, in closing, he says that the effects on individuals are physical weakness, hard-heartedness, the mind becomes weak as well, not really sharp. The inclination towards evil becomes stronger, and people break down at the time of trial and tribulation. We begin to lack concern for others, and we become people that are not cognizant of the Day of Judgment, and we become deprived from the love of Allah Ta'ala. And on groups, we find that it empties out the soul of the group and collapses the strength of the group. And so everything that was mentioned, we have to be people of discipline, we have to be people of ibadah, we have to remind each other, we have to be focused on the reality and the nature of the world. We have to remember that there's a consequence for our actions. This is the remedy that he's bringing forward, and we end with that. وَنُصَلِّ وَنُسَلِّمْ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ الْكَرِيمِ